I hadn't realized how far I had drifted from the woman I once was. The days blended into each other. Silence seemed to have become a part of me. My husband Bennie was away so often for work that I felt I was almost living alone. For years it had been just the two of us in this house, our house. But that warmth was gone, and in its place was a void that I could no longer ignore. Bennie was so absorbed in his work that he hardly seemed to notice me. The years we'd spent together had melted away like the fading light at dusk. I felt like a shadow in my own life, a ghost in a house once filled with conversation and laughter. That Friday night, I found myself staring at the empty chair across from me in the dining room. It was the chair where Bennie should have been. He was in Edinburgh, and I was here alone. As the clock ticked in the silence, I remembered that time was passing, but nothing had changed. I needed a change. I needed something, anything at all. The thought of spending another night locked inside these walls had become unbearable. Without giving it much thought, I got up and headed for the wardrobe. My jumper, which I hadn't worn for years, caught my eye. It was the kind of jumper a woman like me probably wouldn't wear anymore, but as I held it in front of me, I remembered a time when I wore it often, a time when I felt alive. After a long time, I felt the excitement of rediscovering something new. The reflection in the mirror seemed to be smiling back at me. But was it them of now, or the woman I was trying to remember? I wasn't sure. I grabbed my coat and my keys. I didn't want to think about it anymore. I was going to do something for myself. The air outside was chilly, and a light mist hung over the cobbled streets of Chelsea. As I walked towards my destination, the rhythm of my steps echoed with the sound of my shoes. I knew exactly where I was going. A place like the Crown and Lark, a place where I could disappear, was the perfect spot. A pub tucked away in the city, unchanged for decades, a little piece of history hidden in the streets. The warm light of the pub captivated me as soon as I stepped inside. The faint smell of wood, leather, and aged whiskey intoxicated my senses. It was comforting, familiar, a small escape from the outside world. I walked over to the bar, found a quiet corner, and ordered a gin and tonic. The barman looked at me with a knowing smile, as if he'd worked here for years. I gave him a gentle nod in return, then took my drink and sipped at it, letting the cold ease the tension from my shoulders. But then something caught my eye. Across the room, a young man sat alone, someone I had never seen before. He looked out of place, maybe 23, with slightly unruly black hair falling over his forehead. Our eyes met for a moment, then quickly darted away, his cheeks flushed. I wasn't sure why, but there was something about him that stirred something in me. It felt like a spark, a flicker of light, something I hadn't felt in years. I tried to push it away, tried to ignore it, but I couldn't stop myself. I took another sip, but my eyes drifted to him again. I couldn't explain why, but the connection between us was undeniable. When our eyes met again, this time he didn't look away. Instead, he responded with a small, shy smile, and for some reason my heart skipped a beat. I couldn't remember the last time someone had looked at me like that, really looked at me. I wasn't sure how far I was willing to go, but somehow I didn't want to suppress the energy that was rising within me. I leaned forward slightly, the soft clink of my glass filling the space between us. "Would you like to join me?" I asked, my voice soft but inviting. He hesitated for a moment, his eyes drifting briefly to his drink. Then he looked back at me. The words hung between us, filled with a subtle promise. I leaned back in my chair and felt the gin begin to spread through my body, the alcohol working its magic and our conversation flowing effortlessly. His gaze was patient now, soft but intense, as if he'd made up his mind but wasn't ready to act. But I could feel the change, the difference in his body language, the slight tension in his shoulders. I could see it. He was testing me as I was testing him. There was a small silence between us, and in that moment, I made a decision. "Do you want to come with me?" I asked suddenly, my voice deep but inviting. I could feel the weight of the question between us, but I wasn't afraid. Not tonight. Tonight I wasn't looking for fleeting moments or unspoken thoughts. A look of surprise flashed in his eyes, a moment of hesitation. I wondered if I had gone too far, but then he surprised me. I'd like that, he said, his voice patient but mixed with excitement. As he looked at me, I saw a change in him. The hesitation was gone. There was no more hesitation. Without a word, I stood up and grabbed my cloak. He did the same, following my lead. The air outside was sharp. A light rain was falling, but it didn't matter. The city, the night, everything felt far away now. At that moment, it was just Alex and me. We walked side by side in silence, our steps synchronized with the rhythm of the rain. I led the way, my thoughts racing through my head. I wasn't sure what would happen when we got there, but I knew I wouldn't turn back. There was no turning back now. We reached my home, a small cottage tucked away from the main roads. The lights in the windows reflected the soft glow of the street lamps outside. I opened the door and he stepped inside. The moment we crossed the threshold, it felt like we had stepped into another world. My home, my sacred space, suddenly felt exposed with him there. I had lived here for years, but never with anyone like him. I felt vulnerable, intimate. I hung up my coat, the soft click of the hanger breaking the silence. Alex stood in the doorway for a moment, hesitated, then stepped fully inside. His eyes scanned the room but remained fixed on me. There was a question in those eyes. I couldn't quite make it out. "I don't usually do this," I said, my voice quieter now, as if trying to forgive myself, as if this decision needed an explanation. He smiled, the same shy smile he had before. "It's all right," he said, his voice warm. "Neither am I." I let out a soft laugh and moved towards the couch, gesturing for him to sit next to me. I felt a strange mixture of excitement and nerves. "You're different," he said a few seconds later. "I don't know how to explain it, but you are." I turned to look at him, my gaze soft. But there was something deeper, something I hadn't felt in years. "How am I different?" I asked, curious. He shrugged, but his expression was sincere. "You don't hide anything. There's no need to play a role with you." I nodded slowly. Maybe I've played enough roles for years. Maybe tonight I just want to be myself. No mask, no game. For years I had protected myself with layers I had built around myself. Was it his youth, his vulnerable gaze that was peeling away those layers? "I like that," he said quietly. "I like that you're real." His words stirred something in me. It was simple, yet something about it touched me deeply. I moved closer, the space between us shrinking. The tension in the air was palpable now, a charged intensity full of expectation. I could feel his warmth, his presence, and the longing that had been building all evening. My hand brushed against his, a small movement but one that sent an electric spark through me. His once cautious hands, his fingers, traced my skin with a sensitivity that made me pause. "If you don't want to, we don't have to," I whispered, realizing the risk I was taking. "We can just talk. No need to take another step." But he didn't answer with words. Instead, he moved slowly, deliberately, closer. His lips brushed softly against mine, and my heart began to race. At first it was soft, hesitant, but then it deepened, as if he could no longer resist the attraction between us. I led him to the bedroom, my pulse quickening with each step. As we entered the room, soft moonlight filtered through the window, bathing everything in a silvery glow. It was the perfect night, quiet, intimate, and full of promise. He reached for me, his hands trembling slightly as they cupped my face. I closed my eyes, feeling the warmth of his touch deep inside me. "You're so beautiful," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I can't believe this is real." I smiled, the corners of my lips curling upward. "It's really happening," I whispered, "and I think this is exactly what we both need." Slowly we began to connect on a deeper level, with only our closeness and the warmth of the moment between us. I marveled at the contact with his presence, young and strong, yet there was a softness beneath the outward confidence. We pulled away slightly, and he looked at me, his chest rising and falling rapidly, as if he were struggling to catch his breath. And it was then that I realized something had changed inside me. The woman I used to be, the one hidden behind closed doors, the one who faded into the background, was gone. In its place was a new woman, one who felt alive and visible. His hands now explored the contours of my body, a gentle but insistent touch that made my heart race in a way I hadn't felt in years. His lips touched my neck, sending a shiver down my spine. There was no rush, no hurry. We explored each other slowly, savoring the novelty of it all. It wasn't just physical. It was emotional, raw. For the first time in years, I was confronted with a sense of connection I had never experienced before. "You make me feel alive again," I whispered, my voice barely audible as I ran my fingers through his hair. He looked at me, his eyes filled with an intensity that made my chest tighten. "You are alive, Keitha. You just needed to remember that." His words hit me deeply, and for a moment I was overwhelmed by the reality inside me. I had forgotten. For so long I had been a passive participant in my own life, just letting time pass. But tonight, I had truly woken up, in a way I hadn't for years. "I never thought I'd find someone like you," he murmured, his voice soft, almost reverent. I smiled slowly, my fingers still running through his hair. "And I never thought I'd find you," I whispered. "But sometimes the best things come when you least expect them." We lay there in the dark, wrapped in the sheets, our hearts beating in sync. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the city had returned to its silence. Just as I was beginning to relax, a knock on the door broke the silence. My heart stopped for a moment, the sudden sound hitting my face like a slap, completely at odds with the intimacy we had just shared. Alex's eyes darted to the door, panic flickering across his face. I froze, not knowing what to do. Bennie, my husband, had returned early. I can't." Alex stammered, his voice shaking. I silenced him with a sharp look. "Don't say anything," I whispered, urgency in my voice. I quickly pulled him up and led him towards the wardrobe. There was no time to explain. My mind was racing, my heart was pounding with fear, but I couldn't back down now. I walked quickly to the door, took a deep breath, tried to calm myself, then opened it. Bennie was standing there, briefcase in hand, tie loose around his neck. "Bennie," I said, my voice a little too bright, a little too forced. "I didn't expect you back so soon." He smiled, his eyes tired but satisfied. "The journey was shorter than I thought. I wanted to surprise you, thought we could get back to our routine." I smiled, but it was the least natural smile I had ever given. "Glad you're back," I said, stepping aside to let him in. "How was the trip?" As he stepped inside, I made my way to the wardrobe, glancing at the door where Alex was carefully hiding, slightly ajar. My heart started to race. I had to keep Bennie from finding out. Not tonight. Bennie kept talking, but my attention was elsewhere. I had to get Alex out of here. Quickly. But how? "I'm going to take a quick shower," Bennie said, oblivious to the storm inside me. I nodded, forcing a smile, my heart still pounding. "Sure," I said, and walked towards the kitchen, already making plans in my head. As Bennie headed for the bathroom, I turned to Alex, urgency silently flashing in my eyes. "Now," I whispered, "go out the back, quickly." Without a word, he slipped past me and out the back door into the cold night. His eyes met mine one last time, and for a moment there was a silent understanding between us. He was gone. Now it was just me and Bennie. After a few awkward exchanges, Bennie sat down on the couch and flicked through the TV channels, assuming everything was normal. But inside I felt like I had crossed a line I had set for myself long ago, a line I had promised myself I would never cross again. I couldn't stop thinking about Alex, how he made me feel, alive, seen, wanted. For the first time in years, I felt like a woman again, not just a wife. And as Bennie sat comfortably on the couch, completely unaware of the emotions stirring within me, I smiled. I felt a pang of guilt, but it was small, a fleeting thing, overwhelmed by the exhilaration of what had just happened. As the night wore on, I sat next to Bennie, my mind still on the moments I had shared with Alex, and for the first time in years, I felt truly awake. Tonight, I hadn't just played the role of the faithful wife. I had become the woman who had once been connected to life, the woman who had been rekindled by feelings I thought I had lost. And as I closed my eyes, a smile tugged at the corners of my lips, knowing that when I woke up in the morning, I wouldn't be the same woman.